It's your future with Joyce Gioia. Want to know what's coming and how to prepare for it? This show is for you. Armed with this information and these insights, our host Joyce Gioia will help you make better decisions both personally and professionally. Joyce will cover all the trends, from social to economic, to workforce, and more. You will have a chance to get your questions answered in a segment we call, I'm Glad You Asked. This is one show you can't afford to miss. Now on Futures Television. It's your future with Joyce Gioia.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Future with Joyce Gioia. I am Rom Gayoso, co-host. We're broadcasting via Futures Television, the home of the future on television. If you're listening to the show via podcast or watching us on TV, you too can be part of the conversation. Just visit our YouTube channel, and that is IMCI Magazine, where we continue to chat about the topic of the day. You can also access this information on our website, and that is www.futurestelevision.com. So don't be shy. We transmit via Roku TV, that is the Roku app, the memory stick, or the Roku TV sets, and via Apple TV. Don't forget to add Futures Television to your preferred list of channels using your Apple TV device. You can also listen to the show via Radio Futures, the wave of the future on the radio. Today, our topic is from conflict to non-conflict. And for that, we will speak with Stephen Hecht, co-founder of Million Peacemakers. So let me say a few words about the show. If you have a question about what's coming and would like to find out how to prepare for it, then worry no more. Our host, Joyce Gioia, will share lots of valuable information, thought-provoking ideas, and some great insights about a variety of topics, and she will cover several emerging trends. And armed with this information and these insights, you are sure to make better decisions. So without further ado, let's welcome Joyce Gioia to the show. How are you doing today, Joyce?
I'm just terrific. Thank you very much for asking, Rom. And it's great to be back, of course. And we're very fortunate that we have Stephen Hecht here with us today. I met Stephen when I was in Montreal recently, and I was so impressed that I asked him if he would be on this show. And here he is today. So we're privileged to have Stephen with us today.
Wonderful. So let's say a few words about him and, of course, his book, Non-Conflict, The Art of Everyday Peacemaking. Right? Stephen Hecht is the co-author of this bestseller, Non-Conflict, The Art of Everyday Peacemaking, and the co-founder of Chief Executive Peacemaker of Million Peacemakers. He brings over 35 years of personal, business, and geopolitical experience to the field of peacemaking. Founded in 2014, Million Peacemakers is a nonprofit organization which empowers people to transform conflict to non-conflict. With a focus on youth, families, and businesses, over 235,000 people with 7.8 million have been impacted. Million Peacemakers recently launched its youth initiative with over 55 young leaders from around the world in the first cohort, with the two 22-year-old co-chairs from Argentina and Canada joining the Million Peacemakers Board of Directors. He's the winner of the Canada Award for Business Excellence and the YMC Peace Medal. Stephen served YPO leadership at chapter, regional, and international levels with a focus on education and networks. He is currently chair of the Peace Action Network, building bridges in 140 countries with a focus on inner and family peace, as well as polarization and conflict zones. Stephen is also vice chair of the YPO Impact Council, which consists of the Peace Action Network, People Action Network, Planet Action Network, and Sustainable Business Network. Well, without further ado, let's welcome Stephen to the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great, thank you. It's an honor to be here with both of you and with your audience.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. And let's start with your journey. I understand that your career started in real estate. Can you briefly tell us your story?
Actually, it ended in real estate before I became a full-time peacemaker. My career started in the family business, which was in the formal wear business. Tuxedo rentals, sales, bridal shops, formal wear shops. We're the largest in Canada in that industry. We manufactured as well. From there, It went on to, and that was a private company. From there, it was a public or two public companies and department stores and computer type stores, big box and mall stores, and then real estate. So I've had a few different careers, and each one had a fair amount of conflict in them, which would take 2 of these shows or 3 of these shows. We won't have to get into all that detail.
And what led you to write your book?
Well, the book came after an event that I did for the Young President Organization, YPO, when I was the regional learning chair for the Canadian region. I've had a fair amount of personal conflict, business conflict, and the tools that I learned back in business school and that I practiced in negotiation, which was great for a union, but not necessarily great for longer term relationships, be it personal or business. And in talking to my fellow CEOs from across Canada and around the world, they agreed that there was a fair amount of conflict they had, and they weren't necessarily equipped to deal with them effectively. So I thought I would do this event on conflict resolution back in May 2012. And I bought about a dozen books on conflict resolution. I would spend my nights and weekends reading them. But I found they were quite academic and typically by PhDs for a PhD audience. And we need something very practical, something we could apply right away. And in interviewing these authors, they were brilliant and well-versed in theory. But I realized I would have to create the event myself to get that take-home value, the experiential learning that we needed. Around that time, I was introduced to Dr. Amir Kafir from Israel, who had worked with our members in conflict zones, such as Israelis and Arabs, and Greeks and Turks and Indians and Pakistanis. And Amir agreed to facilitate the event. And we put together a team of academics and practitioners with a goal, come with a model that was so powerful, could work for any conflict, from an internal conflict to an identity-based conflict, which are the toughest. And it'd be simple enough that it fits on the back of a business card after you learn it. So that's what led to Nonflict. And the event won the Best Leadership Development Award in the world after we shared it with about 700 members and their spouses and their young adults. And then Amir and I realized we wanted to have impact beyond YPO. And we co-authored a book with the goal that it would be very approachable, non-academic, very practical, short, and any word over 3 syllables I question. And that became the Nonflict book in the first version in English in 2016, translated into Spanish in 2019, and actually shared a copy with the Pope when I was at the Vatican in 2019, and in Marathi, where we have championed in India, who's spread this to women's groups and college students, etc. So the book has been a vehicle, and it's an audiobook format as well, and it's actually free on audiobook on Spotify.
Oh, that's good to know.
It's part of our gift to the world.
Well, I'm kind of in the middle of reading mine, and I just find it fascinating. And I love the fact that you and Amir put so much of yourselves into it, and you have stories about how you've applied Nonflict and about your lives and how you learned lessons as you all came to these understandings. It's a small book, and I highly recommend it to anybody, really anybody, because we all have conflict in our lives of one sort or another. And this little book can help you work through it. So what is Nonflict? And then I'm going to ask you, what are the 3 steps in Nonflict? Stephen.
Okay, so there was no word for resolved conflict. We came up with our own. Actually, it was my stepson who came up with the word Nonflict in one of our brainstorming sessions, so we trademarked it. So Nonflict is a good one. Nonflict is another way of dealing with conflict. Often the 4 known ways are to flee from conflict, which is to avoid conflict, to use force or power to deal with conflict, to just fold, give the other person what they want, or to compromise, a 50-50 solution. And conflict is a fifth way of dealing with conflict. And your next question, what are the 3 steps? So the first step is first to understand yourself and your partner, the person you're in conflict with. And Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about it and 5 minutes on the solution. So we want to understand, what is the real problem here? What's the real underlying conflict? So we would share facts and feelings around the conflict. And feelings are important because we are human, we're not robots, and their conflict is very emotional. And we would actively listen to our partner, the person we're in conflict with, and mirror back the essence of what we heard and ask, did I understand you well? And is there anything else? And there's always something else. And taking the time to listen without interrupting, without judging, having an open heart, open mind, having empathy for the person, without having to agree with them, by the way, when we're listening to them. You're not giving up your point of view to listen to them. So that builds trust. Without having to agree, you just listen, you're showing them respect, and they feel listened to. Okay, that puts you in a better frame of mind to resolve the conflict. So step 1, to understand yourself and your partner. And you're also sharing what's important to each of you and listening to that. And we find when we listen to what's important to me and what's important to you, invariably, we want the same thing. We all want to feel respected. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel needed, appreciated, and have hope for ourselves. And if it's a geopolitical conflict, we want to have hope for our children and future generations. And that's universal. Doesn't matter where you're from in the world, what religion, culture, anything, we all want that. So when we go through step 1, we realize we have commonality. So then we discuss together in step 2, what's our shared reality? What's the real underlying conflict here versus the symptoms of the conflict? We need agreement on what the real underlying conflict is. And then the next question is, what's working well for us? What do we appreciate about our partner? That's from positive psychology, puts us in a better frame of mind to move forward. Then the next question is, what is our worst case scenario and how would it feel? Because we need, and this is from change management, a real or perceived crisis to take action toward change. Then step 3 of conflict is to co-create. And to co-create is we visualize what's our ideal reality, how would that feel? Then what are the obstacles to achieve our ideal reality? Then of the obstacles we could control or influence, what could we do to overcome them? Followed by an action plan, who's going to do what and when. That's it. And those questions are on the back of my card and summarized in detail with explanation, with a lot of stories in the book.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about a recent conflict I had with my husband. My husband has 400 CDs that are all lined up on the bottom of the bookcase in our great room, and he never listens to them. I mean, there's also some little cassette tapes. He never listens to any of the CDs or the cassette tapes, and they're there, and I'm trying to clean out the house, and he really stonewalled me on that. And I was thinking in terms of co-creating a reality, that his reality is he doesn't want to change anything, and my reality is that it will feel so much better when we get so much of the extra stuff out of our lives. So I'm looking forward to going back and taking the book and applying it in that situation to co-create some sort of situation that we can both live with, that it won't mean that he'll just cave and get out the boxes and put the CDs in a closet somewhere. I mean, it wouldn't matter whether they were exposed to the world or in a closet, because he's still not going to listen to them. But at least he would feel better about it. So I understand that you've applied the non-flict way to heal the rift between Israelis and Palestinians. Tell us about that experience.
Well, clearly it's not totally healed. There's still a conflict there, and I am going to be there actually in January and then again in April. But I work at the grassroots level. Our strategic positioning is of Million Peacemakers is vote for those who desire peace. Million Peacemakers enables global transformation by reframing conflict into non-conflict. So we focus on people at the grassroots level mostly who desire peace versus the politicians who often desire conflict. So when after we had done that event in Canada, I wanted to try this with a tougher audience. And I'm a Canadian Jew, and I had gotten buy-in from our Palestine and Israel chapters to do a workshop in Jerusalem. And 3 days before that, I went with my wife and stepson to the Kalandia refugee camp on the other side of the wall, the famous wall. And I met with this group of activist women in the women's co-op there. And the first question to me from the 85-year-old founder was, "You're from Canada. Your prime minister did not accept us as a state in the UN. What did the Palestinians do against Canadians?" And I had to think for a minute. And my answer was, that's true, our prime minister did that. But I'm not a politician. I'm a business person that travels around the world. And all of that I and the people I meet know about you is what we hear about in the media. Would you be willing to share your true stories I could then share when I travel? So she said, okay. So we went around the table. I took them through the questions of non-conflict that I mentioned earlier. And when we got to, and this was through a translator with 15 women around this table. And when we got to the last question, what could you do or we do to achieve the ideal reality, which for them was to live in peace and harmony and have hope for the future for their spouses, their families and children. The founder came and hugged my wife and looked at me in the eye and said, "Thank you for being a friend to the Palestinians. We like what we learned and we're going to use it with our husband. But more importantly, we're prepared to meet 15 Jewish Israeli women. And if you could get Obama, Netanyahu, and Abbas in the room, we mothers won't let them out till there's a deal." And that's when I realized I had in my hand a gift to the world I needed to share. And that's when I left my career in real estate to do this full time, because I felt I couldn't. And I used non-conflict. My worst case scenario for not doing it full time is I would feel that I didn't make the impact that I could have in the world. And so that's when I left real estate to start this nonprofit or co-found the nonprofit Million Peacemakers. Since then, yes, I have worked with other Israelis and Palestinians, and I have amazing stories of people who really stereotype the other just based on what their life, their true experience, and everyone's right. It's their own framing, it's their own lens through which they see the world. But when they discover those commonalities and focus on them, which we do in step one, and they realize the shared reality, I've seen brothers being created from enemies in 5 minutes, brothers and sisters.
Wow. So powerful. And when you think about formal wear and real estate versus actually making a difference by creating peace in the world, there's just it just doesn't compute in terms of the feelings that it gives us, the experience that we have in making such a profound difference in the world. Now, you mentioned that you also worked at the Vatican and met the Pope. So without breaking any confidentiality, tell us a little bit about that engagement, please.
That came from a retreat we did with our team, and we have a bunch of young people in our team, and we'll talk about that a little later. And one of the young people who had gotten married the year before said, "I had to meet the priest before I got married. He was Catholic. And it would have been great if he gave me and my fiance these tools." I thought that was a good idea. So I had to be in London October the 16th to meet the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, now the late Rabbi. And I saw London, Rome was a 2-hour flight. So I put into my agenda, meet the Pope on October the 15th. And so that was visualizing my ideal reality. And then what are the obstacles to achieve my ideal reality? Well, I'm a Montreal Jewish guy who doesn't have any connection to the Pope. So what could I do to overcome the obstacles that I could control or influence? Well, one of my board members is an Argentinian Catholic, Laura. And I called up Laura. "Hey, Laura, do you know the Pope?" And she said, "No." I said, "Okay, that much for that." So and he didn't return my email, but I'm an optimist, right? And about a month before, and I still hadn't booked my flight, I attended a cocktail party from my law firm, and everyone was there in a suit, but there was one gentleman with a brown robe and a cross. And I went up to him and I introduced myself, and he was Bishop Thomas Dowd, the Bishop of Montreal. And I mentioned the idea, and he said, "Well, that's a good idea." And I said, "Great. Do you know if the Pope's available? I have an opening on October the 15th. And he said, "I'm really sorry. There's a bishops' conference all of October, which I'm going to be attending. But I happen to know the cardinal in charge of peace, Cardinal Turkson, the cardinal in charge of families, Cardinal Farrell, and maybe they would help." So I signed a book for each of the cardinals and for the bishop, and I booked my flight to London. But because I didn't have the appointment yet, I kept asking people if they knew the Pope. And I had a haircut, and my barber's Italian. He knows a lot of people. I said, "Hey, Giovanni, do you know the Pope?" He said, "Steve, come on. How would I know the Pope? Besides, he's Argentinian." But it's really funny you asked, because the person whose hair I cut right before yours, he showed me a picture of his son who had just met the Pope. Maybe he could help.
Wow.
So I contacted the father, who introduced me to his son, who introduced me to someone who ran his Rome office, Robert Hassan, and Robert said, "Your timing's impeccable. The Vatican just asked me to help them plan an event called Religions and the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They are inviting religious leaders from around the world on how they can make an impact on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And maybe they would let you be in the audience. There are 400 seats in the audience." I said, "Great, would I get to meet the Pope?" He said, "No, only the speakers meet the Pope." I said, "Okay, what does it take to be a speaker?" He said, "Well, you have to be a world-renowned religious leader or part of the UN, and you're neither. You'll be really lucky if I get you in the audience." Again, visualize my ideal. What can I do to overcome the obstacles? I said, "Okay, let me send an email to Robert, and I'll try anyway." And I included a sermon by a Catholic priest on the teachings of Jesus, how they relate to conflict. And I included some stories on work that I had done, because it was an interfaith event with different religious leaders, work I had done with the Palestinians and Israelis, and some stories around that. And I sent it to Robert to forward to the organizer. 2 weeks later, Robert calls me and says, "Steve, it's a miracle. They took me really to be in the audience, to be to the speaker on the final panel on how these religious leaders could use conflict to achieve the SDGs." So that's how I got to the Vatican. It was 8 months after I expected to be, but that's all right. So I was on that final panel and had an audience with the Pope, and actually it was Cardinal Turkson who was responsible for peace. So he was a very important actor. And actually, it was very interesting. Everyone there reads their speeches, and for whatever reason, I didn't read my 10-minute speech because the person who was right before me, who was supposed to be right before me, passed away, and I just it was quite an interesting experience there. Anyway, I just spoke off the cuff, and they invited me to come back a month later to advise the working group, or speak to the working group advising the Pope on peace and nonviolence strategy. And that was my second time in the Vatican in 2019. And I was going to do an event, Love Thy Neighbor the Conflict Way. I was going to do it at the Vatican with YPO and with people. I was going to get 3,000 youth from Rome, and we were going to do stuff together, but COVID happened and it got canceled. But anyway, so the power of visualizing your ideal reality and taking action, I've seen it numerous times work really beyond expectations.
Well, I think I should take some lessons from you, because I actually have this dream called the Legacy Foundation. And the Legacy Foundation will engage former CEOs and other professionals to travel to previously war-torn countries so that they may teach the people how to create small businesses. And when people can put a roof over their heads and food on their table, then they're much less likely to take up arms against each other. And I need to start visualizing that as well. You created your foundation called Million Peacemakers. specifically, what does the foundation do? But before that, I want to mention that I just love your title, Chief Executive Peacemaker. That's really cool. So tell us what the foundation does.
So it's a charity in the US and nonprofit in Canada. We've applied for charity status. So what we do is share the tools of conflict. And it's a workshop. And the first half of the workshop is to understand ourselves, why we might feel and act the way we do before we even get into conflict, which is the second half. We learn the different ways of dealing with conflict that I mentioned earlier. A bit about framing and active listening. We practice that, those skills, and then we learn conflict and we practice conflict. So Million Peacemakers works. It started with businesses, and I still work with companies, and they pay for this so that we could then use the funds to share it with those who can't pay, or we don't charge, like NGOs that are often youth focused. And that's what we do, and we do it through collaboration. So one of our collaborators I mentioned earlier in India, for example, wanted to work with, and he has the largest media company there, and wanted to work with to empower women and then college students, and we work together to train the trainers, kind of thing, to bring conflict to the grassroots and to change their lives, and it impacts they deal with conflict within themselves, within their homes, and then they make their community a better place by dealing with conflicts constructively in their communities. And I have many stories on how that has been used to make their communities a better place for all, safer, cleaner, and just overall better lives for everyone involved.
Such worthwhile work that you're doing. And you mentioned to me, and I've actually written a trend alert from conflict to conflict about you and what you're doing with conflict in the world. And I know that you created this youth initiative to future-proof the organization. And I'm so impressed that you've recruited 2 young people, one young woman and one young man. And I think that this makes so much sense, the way that you've gone about it. Tell us more about what that youth initiative will be doing in the world.
Thank you. So, future proofing was one of our key strategies to ensure that the organization and the work would continue after I'm retired, let's say, and many of our senior people are, knowing that the youth have so much energy, enthusiasm, and also they care about the present and the future. They're going to live in it longer than we are. So we did an outreach, and we identified out of hundreds of candidates 2 incredible people: Theodora Sauvé from Quebec, who was just valedictorian of the School of Business at McGill and now is in law school focusing on justice and peace, and Gianluca Piranfuzelli from Argentina, who's also in law school, and he's been in youth leadership since he was 12, including starting an NGO and working with Model UN. Thea's background is in coaching, and before that she was a national and international level figure skater. So real great work ethic and ability to work in teams, because she was a pair skater, and they put together groups of young people that are focusing either on social media or on project management and different areas to work with our other committees, and we're integrating all of them, and they joined our board. And we're doing an international conflict month in May 2023 that they're going to lead in partnership with businesses who could be sponsors of this and partners in the initiative, to empower youth to have a more peaceful, to co-create with us a more peaceful future for themselves, ourselves, and our children.
I'm thinking that we should do a TV show from there and interview the 2 young people who are running your youth initiative. So let's plan on that for May 2023.
Sure. And actually, we're going to be doing it in about 15 cities around the world.
Oh, so it will be virtual?
It's going to be in person and virtual, hybrid and in person, in these 15 cities. So we have leaders,
Wow.
young leaders in each of these cities who are going to be organizing them.
Wow. So such a great idea. So, Stephen, you are an important person in an important organization, the Young Presidents Organization, YPO. I've been hearing about for years and years as a speaker, and you've taught your non-flict way to your fellow members. And in fact, you've won awards for teaching them the non-flict way. Tell us about your most recent success in New York around the time of the United Nations meeting.
Right. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I chair the YPO Peace Action Network, which was the oldest network in YPO. It's been around for 20 years, and is part of the Impact Council, which is aligned with the UN SDGs of people, planet, sustainable business, and peace. So we did an event on the afternoon of September 21st, which is International Day of Peace. And we had speakers on each of these areas, each of these focuses and pillars of the SDGs. And then we had breakout groups, which we call Impact Action Forums. And they use non-flict to go through the process on how to affect change in either planetary issues or climate action, or in the case of Peace Action Network, creating a more peaceful future. So because this is a great tool to go through any problem or any conflict, and with each of the people taking the time to share their facts, feelings, what was important to them. So we just built on this process in order to then take action toward change in each of these areas of the SDGs.
It sounds like that it was to a degree similar to what the Vatican did in terms of the SDGs versus the religions of the world. You were doing the SDGs versus how do we actually have an impact on them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and actually the Vatican had the same desired outcome. It was how religious leaders can make an impact in the world to achieve the SDGs, because they have a longer term horizon typically than politicians who are very short term focused. And the feeling of the Pope was that religious leaders coming together with a longer term focus can create more of an impact in the world. So here it's business people who have a longer term focus, and care about the future for their communities, their businesses, their families, can come together to achieve the SDGs, and using non-flict just as a framework to get there.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. I'm fascinated by the fact that we can take non-flict and apply it to personal disagreements as well as conflict in business and government. Would you talk a little bit about, I know that you've been engaged by people to help create non-flict. I was going to say resolve conflict, but you prefer create non-flict between some individuals at times. And you're not a mediator, but what you're doing is you're helping the two parties to co-create something new, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not mediators. We give people tools to resolve their own conflict. So in a recent story, and I'm not breaking confidentiality because he was open to share it, we were asked by a CEO of a company, a real estate company, to train their employees and key staff and his business partner in non-flict. And we always, after going through the first half of it, we like to choose a conflict. We always ask them to choose a conflict they're having to use as an example before they go into breakout rooms and do it one-on-one with each other with their real life conflicts. So the conflict that came up was one that they were having with the property manager of an investment they had in a large apartment complex, a student apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And they were about to break up the relationship with that business partner. They felt their values weren't aligned. These people cared about the customer, cared about safety. And an inspector had come and found one balcony that was deemed to be unsafe. And this company wanted, as a result, to shut off all the balconies to all the students in that residence. And the property manager wasn't agreeing, and they were having a big conflict about it, and to the point where it was possibly going to go to litigation, or they said, how can we deal with this person? He doesn't care about safety and security, and we'll never deal with him again. And this person brought them, millions of dollars of value in new business. So we go through the questions: what are your facts? What are your feelings? And they were very clear on their facts, feelings. They're feeling disrespected by him. He doesn't care about people. We care about people. We care about safety. And then I asked them, well, now think of the framing of the other party of let's say Bill. Think of his background. Think of his situation. And if you were in his shoes for a minute, what would your facts and feelings be, and what's important to you? So they had to think for a minute, and we had like 5 of the people engage with it, and they all contributed. And when they realized, well, Bill was a property manager, he had 2 people managing that property. There were 600 units, apartment units there.
Wow.
And Bill would have to deal with not only the 600 apartment dwellers, but their parents. So they would potentially have 1,900 calls to deal with, with 2 people on staff, number one. And they said, well, Bill also does care about safety, but Bill was saying, well, maybe we should get a second opinion before we shut everything down. And also, if in Bill's shoes, Bill has a contract with the university in the town for multiple apartment buildings, and if word got out that he has unsafe buildings, he could lose his other contracts. So they realized, wow, it's a bigger issue than they thought. And if once they put themselves in Bill's shoes, they had a lot more empathy for him to come up with a co-created solution, which without even Bill being there, they resolved the conflicts. And by the way, 85% of the time, if you go through these questions and put yourself in the shoes of the other, you'll resolve it without the other person being there. And that's what we found in practice. So they resolved the conflict without Bill being there, and then they met with Bill. And what was interesting was when the CEO talked to Bill and told him that we used his example in this workshop, Bill was so overwhelmed by that they cared enough to do that. They did resolve it, and he bought non-flip books for all of his employees and is spreading that. And now they're looking to how to bring non-flip to the people who live in the apartments, because they deal with conflict all the time, as do the property managers. And wouldn't it be a better place to live if we, were able to deal with our neighbors in a more of a non-flictual way than a conflictual way? So it's spread and spread.
Love it. Okay, so we like to end by asking your advice. What advice do you have to give our audience facing conflict with like a relative or a business associate?
Often we're in a hurry to assume what the real conflict is, and we're so emotional, when we feel disrespected, that we don't take the time to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. And as I mentioned earlier, just think about if you were in the other person's shoes, how you might feel. And that would be enough just to give you pause to say, well, maybe there's another truth here, because everyone is always right. And no matter how hard you try to convince someone that they're wrong, the harder you try, often the less effective you'll be, because everyone's right in their own mind. But taking the time to listen to them is enough to diffuse most conflicts and then to come up with a co-created solution. So the advice would be to use non-flip, basically.
Right. And don't forget, you can download it for free on Spotify.
an audiobook, and you could, on Amazon, you could get the hard copy.
Yes.
And it's not too expensive. It's a nice gift around the holidays, by the way.
Yes, it's a lovely little book and not that expensive either. So finally, Stephen, how do you think conflict can inform the future of peace in the world?
It's the fact that we all care about our planet. Everyone wants the same thing, as I mentioned earlier. We all want for ourselves and our, if we have kids or family members, we all want to have a peaceful life. And this is a model to actually have a peaceful life, starting with ourselves, starting with inner peace. Let's start, if everyone just takes the time to resolve our own conflicts using this, and then sharing it with our family members, then the world will be a more peaceful place.
Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me, huh?
You got it.
Exactly. Okay. Wow. Well, this has really been terrific. I've learned a lot, and I know that our audience has as well. I know that conflict is a method that can be used in both personal and business negotiations. And I'm looking forward to learning more about it so that I can really apply it in my life as well. Ram, do you have any questions from our audience by any chance?
No questions from the audience today.
Okay. Well, thank you,
This
Steve.
has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Joyce and Stephen, for your time today.
Thank you, Ram, for hosting us, and Joyce. It was really lovely to see you again in virtually. I look forward to seeing one or both of you in person here in Montreal or anywhere in the world where we happen to overlap.
Thank you, Stephen. Looking forward as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, folks, thank you so very much for being here with Joyce and I and Stephen. And remember, if you're watching the show on Futurist Television as a podcast or as a recorded event in one of the social media platforms, you too can be part of the conversation. Watch for the links on this video and, of course, the link to the book so you can continue the conversation on our YouTube channel. I hope to see you again on another episode of It's Your Future with Joyce Gioia. See you next time.
It's Your Future with Joyce Gioia. Want to know what's coming and how to prepare for it? This show is for you. Armed with this information and these insights, our host Joyce Gioia will help you make better decisions both personally and professionally. Joyce will cover all the trends, from social to economic, to workforce, and more. You will have a chance to get your questions answered in a segment we call, I'm Glad You Asked. This is one show you can't afford to miss. Now on Futurist Television. It's Your Future with Joyce Gioia.